Welcome to Organizational Sherlocks, the podcast where business meets psychology and your organizational puzzles meet their match.
Join us for captivating stories and practical solutions to unravel your toughest challenges.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, your guides to a prescription for business success.
Let's dive in.
Welcome back to our curious listeners. So this is the first episode of April, and this April we're going to be talking about organizational structures. So some of you may have been exposed to organizational structures. Some of you may have not been yet, but everyone works in an organizational structure. So we want to discuss, the types of organizational structures, creating them, planning for them, their purposes and the like.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I think it's important for us to, kind of think about it because organizational structures do change, right? The way that companies, as they grow or as they change, they also sometimes will change their structures to kind of help information flow more smoothly throughout, or to have a more defined chain of command, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's important for us to start off just defining what an organizational structure is and kind of within the context of this podcast, what are we trying to kind of help our listeners understand, or what are we hoping they take away from this? So Morgan, I'm going to throw it back at you if that's okay. And just ask, when you think of organizational structure, what comes to mind?
So when I think of organizational structures, I'm thinking about how people are aligned in a company to, promote and create the productive activities that occur in that company. So how are activities done? What activities are done? How are people departmentally separated to support the activities of the company? Because, a company, all people are working towards one end goal right? Whether it be a service or a product that they're presenting. But, there's an accounting team in pretty much every company. And so that accounting team, they're supporting that creation of the product, or they're supporting that creation of that service generation. And so you have to determine how these departments have to be separated, how these individuals have to be separated across the company to allow it to be successful, to grow, to build alignment among the team. So there's a general understanding of where are we going? What are we doing? Why are we doing it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's absolutely true. And I'm thinking about, sometimes when maybe I've been frustrated or I've worked with people who are frustrated and in their roles, and oftentimes it's because they don't know who to go to or where to go, right? Because that structure isn't created in a way that is very clear for them, right? And so I do think that's also a part of it is, who do I report to? Not just, as kind of the idea of who is my boss, but who are my dotted line reports, the ones that maybe aren't as distinct, but people that should be included in certain decisions, like finance, like sales, like HR, whatever area those are, or whatever areas those are, kind of how do those dotted line structures all work within the greater framework that's created within the organization?
Yeah. Who exists where? Who's reporting to who? Who has decision-making capabilities? Who doesn't? That all is all created within an organizational structure, and the level of decision-making capabilities even. And so it's really important to have that alignment across the team for, okay, I'm reporting to this person, or this person is reporting to me. At my company, I'm adjusting our organizational structure right now. Funny enough, I'm kind of always doing that, I guess, as we bring new team members on, as we're growing, as we're changing our plans, we're planning our organizational structure. In short, I'm probably going to start saying org structure, a lot quicker to say, but so I'm differentiating. This person was in this department, but they help a lot more in this department now. So we're moving them, or are they interlaying between two departments and communicating that to the team? As you discussed, Elizabeth, it is important to communicate so people know who their resources are and where those resources exist in the team. Especially if you bring a leader in, for example, you bring a leader in that's maybe mid-tier. The lower tier individuals, they might have a hard time accepting that person unless this organizational structure is shown to them even. So presenting those org structures, it's also important, not just developing them, but communicating.
Absolutely. Yeah. I really think it all kind of falls down, and this is maybe my bias or my opinion, but I really think it all kind of flows down to this idea of information and how information is translated and moved across an organization. That's really, in my mind, what it is, whether that's, verbal communication, whether that's, decision making, again, chain of command, performance reviews, whatever it is, it really relates, the foundation is really that information. And how does the company want that information to kind of flow? And so that's usually what I kind of think about and I talk about with my clients, right? I've worked in, and I know we'll get into the different types, but I've worked in very flat organizations where kind of that information flows just kind of through everyone and there's not necessarily a clear decision maker. I've also worked in more hierarchical organizations where there's a very clear, again, chain of command where I know who I need to talk to about a certain thing, who the decision makers are, who we need to influence, and all of those pieces. And I think it's important, like you said, to not just have a conversation about what that structure is, but to really have a visual so people can refer back when they need to from time to time.
Yeah, circling back what you're saying about, communication, it's communicating the activities. So communicating activities like performance evaluations, communicating activities like who is responsible for what job, who is the manager, who is, customer service oriented, who's the logistics individual, who's in shipping and receiving. That's all very important in creating that visual structure. We actually incorporate our visual org structure into our onboarding program so that they understand, who am I reporting to? Who might pull me? And who could I also potentially report to later down the road? What are my growth opportunities at the company even? Creates a career ladder, not just a communication of the present day, but it creates that career ladder for individuals. And again, it's the where are we going? How are all of these activities combining? And which way are we going with that? And so really org structures, while they seem to an extent, I don't know how to say it, I don't know, like it seems like it doesn't have to be communicated in a way. It is important to communicate because it's going to help build that alignment. It's going to help build expectations. It's going to create this global understanding of a company that really doesn't exist without the communication of it. It's building from bottom up or top down in a sense.
Right.
So rather than verbally communicating it, physically showing it, well, it seems less important to do than actually getting this person involved in their position. It actually is going to create long-term expectations and improvement for that person.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think what you're saying is that it really creates a level of clarity and kind of understanding. And I like what you said about global understanding, right? Where everyone in the organization just kind of knows, right? And, you brought up onboarding and I agree. I've been responsible for, building out onboarding structures and onboarding plans for different folks. And, one of the things that I've always found to be really important is not only to show what the organizational structure looks like on paper, but also to bring some of those kind of leaders in those different functions into the onboarding process so that they can understand, again, kind of multifaceted, what it looks like on paper, but they can understand from the leaders what they're trying to do in their function and how that relates to the larger strategy. And that has been, in my experience, really effective. Not only do new folks to an organization get to know the leaders of the organization, but they also, really start to understand how everything comes together, kind of what does the greater puzzle look like, and what are the pieces within that puzzle. So I like what you said about connecting that to onboarding, and I think that's a perfect time to do that, if not before, when somebody's in a recruiting process, so that they can understand what they're walking into. I think that can be really powerful and also offers a level of transparency that, if a company is really going for that and being transparent, that kind of shows and, shows that they're willing to do that on the front end. So
yeah, it shows that there's a level of clarity, like you said, in the company. There's a level of, this is the direction we're going. I'm communicating to you how we function. And it, in a sense, it creates a sense of comfort for new hires. And I've worked with a variety of small companies that have developing hierarchies or different org structures. A lot of them are hierarchical based that I have worked with. And we sometimes are bringing in a manager. So they're coming as like third tier. They're coming above supervisors even. And so how do we build that buy-in? But we're not just communicating to that manager where they exist, but now we're communicating to the individuals that are now reporting to them that they exist here and that they're supported in that level of the position. So for example, a sales team, we had a sales manager come on, and you have to build buy-in within the team. And some team members, they were hesitant because maybe they wanted the role, but they weren't the right fit at the time. Maybe they will be down the road, but communicating that she is supported in the role that she's in, and she is higher up on the hierarchy. We see her as higher up on the hierarchy versus someone that's coming in more of a lower tier level. Maybe this is a brand new position to the company, and they're just for example, production worker, but there's these tiers that they can grow into, to an operator assistant, to an operator, to a supervisor or a team lead, to a manager. Like I said, that career ladder. So it is that clarity, that communication that's super important. And it starts with the hiring process, the onboarding process, and evolves. And these people can evolve with the company. I mean, one of the companies I'm working with currently, they're a small team, but they're growing right now. And something I've been communicating as I help with the hiring is a great line to use is the people we're hiring today are our leaders of tomorrow. It is true, because you need to make sure you have a strong base so that you can grow that base up rather than bringing managers above everyone that are at that level. Maybe you can grow this bottom level person to be in 5 years the supervisor or the manager instead. And so having planned org structures that aren't yet in process, that's also helpful.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Kind of identifying the skill sets that your folks have, and then being able to kind of place them. I think there's a lot of power. And I know today we're not talking about, career trajectories or career pathing. I think that can be another topic for another day, but it does play a role here, because as you look to what is the current org structure and what do you want it to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, right? All of those, you have to also kind of know, and I guess I'm going to liken it to the game of chess, right? You have to know where you're going to move your king and your queen and your pawn and all of these things. Also, I'm not a chess player for what it's worth, so I actually don't know how to play chess. I just know what the pieces are called. But that's okay. Maybe someday I'll learn it.
I'll teach you.
But it's really about moving those pieces and being very strategic about how you do that. And then also developing those folks early on and identifying both aspirations for them, but also future within the organization. So yeah, I think there's a lot at play here. It's not just a clear, we are choosing a cyclical, structure, and this is how it's going to be. There are so many other factors at play just with anything we talk about. There's so many other factors to consider. But I think for today, just to kind of set the stage for our guest that's going to be joining us on our next podcast, I think it's important for us to kind of talk about what are some of the more common organizational structures and what do they look like. So if you're cool with it, I think that maybe we take it in that direction now.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the aptitudes and the skill sets you're going to need in each of the positions is going to depend on the organizational structure. So, Elizabeth, I know you've worked in some more flat structures, also known as a flatarchy, funny enough. So tell me a little bit about some of these flat structures you've worked in and the purposes you see behind them.
Yeah, I think that being in a kind of more of a flat organization, there really is, it's not as clear who you report to or who your boss is, right? It really is more just kind of cross-departmental. People make decisions together, and I would say it's very collaborative. Oftentimes you're reporting to more than one person, right? Now that definitely brings some challenges at times, especially when, maybe the people you report to have different ideas about how something should be done, right? However, what I will say is that I think the benefit there is that it's, in my experience, generally relatively easy to pull people together to kind of create that shared understanding again, right?
Mhm.
I've only worked in flat structures that are very small in nature, and so it's easy to do that. When I have, been in larger organizations or have worked with clients in larger organizations, I think there's a tendency to go towards more of a hierarchy, or kind of to have a little bit more, few more layers, if you
Yeah.
will. But in a lot of consulting firms that I know of, and where I work now, it is very flat. And so it's nice because we can clearly define the responsibilities that we have, but they're still shared, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
In
I
that structure.
I definitely see a lot more flatarchies in those really small companies. It's really hard to have a flatarchy of 100 people because that means you have 100 decision makers. It's a full-on democracy. It's back in the Greek times, full democracy. Everyone's a decision maker, and so because of that, I mean, 51 versus 49 votes, that's going to create a lot of conflict in a company. So once you get to a certain size, a flatarchy is usually really hard to continue persisting. You got to develop some sort of hierarchical structure, whether that be functional or divisional. We'll get into those a little bit later, but I know that flatarchies, maybe it's not, you don't have a company that's a flatarchy, but maybe you have a departmental flatarchy too.
Mhm.
So these organizational structures might also exist within the departments that exist. So you might have for example, divisional structure. So divisional structure is based on is a hierarchical structure where there's a department, but that department is, based off of the purpose. So the service, the end goal service, the end goal product. So maybe you have a divisional structure where in the hierarchy where you have a certain product line. And in developing that product line, so in servicing the client, whether that be accounting, logistics, and sales wise, they're all in one department. And so divisionally in the company, there's multiple divisions for multiple different products, but that division of the company, they might be a flatarchy. So the salesperson is at equal level as the logistics person, who's at an equal level as the bookkeeper, for example. So you can have flatarchies within an organization, but the organization overall might be divisional.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think another way to say, I mean, I know you're using the term divisional, the way that, and maybe this is just a geographical difference. I don't know, who knows. The way I've always kind of thought about it, similar or very same description, but thinking about it more as kind of like a functional or a role-based structure, right?
So that's another structure, actually, what I was going to talk about, Elizabeth. So you're ahead of me, but yes, same mindset. Yeah. There is also the functional of there's a sales department, there's the logistics department, there's the bookkeeping department, maybe there's a department combined. So I know one of the companies I work with, we have the accounting team, which is purchasing, logistics, and bookkeeping and HR all in one. And so we have a flatarchical structure there within that functional department, but there's still a hierarchy. So keep going about your functional department.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And a lot of the companies that I work with are very similar in kind of this structure, right? Where it's hard to do this on a podcast because I am like I like visual. To use a whiteboard and draw things so I can show you what we're talking about. So maybe we can throw some visuals up there on what some of these things look like. But the way that I'm kind of thinking about it is, take marketing, for example, right? Yeah. And I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is, there's kind of the overarching leadership and then there's the marketing, right? Mm-hmm. And within marketing, they may have a leader. But then there's like its own little hierarchy or its own little structure within just that simple marketing area.
Yes.
Not to say marketing is simple because I know it's super complex, but I'm saying within that one area, it has its own structure. And the way that functions compared to HR or finance may look a little bit different. Yeah. And I think a lot of that simply is due to leadership. It's due to priorities. It's due to personalities in the room. I think there's a lot of reasons that happens. But in general, kind of setting it up and then having those different roles or divisions is something I see quite a bit.
Yeah, so to break down those like hierarchical structures, the functional one that you're talking about, Elizabeth, versus the divisional one I was talking about. So in a hierarchical one, maybe where it's functional, we have the CEO, and then with the CEO, we then have multiple VPs. There's a VP or CMO, chief marketing officer, and they oversee the marketing department. Maybe there's a marketing team lead in there. So there's already 3 levels in that hierarchy, and then you have your marketing team. But within that marketing team, there are multiple individuals that do all the same thing. They have a flat hierarchy between them, but really they have this functional hierarchy in the overarching company. And there's still a hierarchy because there's still a team lead, there's still a chief marketing officer, but it's a little different depending on the company. Same thing for the sales department. You have the CEO, then you have maybe a chief revenue officer, and then you have a sales manager, and then maybe you have customer service versus you have like the actual sales development type of individuals. And so there's a functional hierarchical structure there as well. But within the sales development group and the customer service group, those are both flat hierarchies. And potentially the sales development to the customer service is also flat hierarchy. Sales development doesn't have any further decision-making capabilities than the customer service team does. They all have, 1 vote each. They don't have 2 votes to the 1 vote like the sales manager may have. So that's kind of the functional aspect of, okay, you have sales, you have marketing, you have HR, you have maybe production or some other sort of department in there. Then you get to the divisional side. So on the divisional type of hierarchy, you have the CEO and your VPs. Yes, you might have VPs of the various areas, but you might have a chief marketing officer who oversees 5 different departments because there's a marketing professional in each of those departments because that marketing professional is specialized in marketing 1 product line. So maybe you have, maybe you're selling cutlery. So one focuses on the cutlery of, general forks, butter knives, and spoons. One focuses on, higher level kitchen cutlery. So butcher-based knives. One might focus on like the spatulas, the grilling-based type of information or products that you have. And so you have the chief marketing officer who's overseeing all these marketing individuals, but they're divisionally separated based off of the product. Same thing, you have a sales team within each of those divisions. And the sales versus the bookkeeper versus the logistics person versus the marketing person in that divisional department, they are a flat hierarchy. They all have shared responsibility to create the product, promote the product, sell the product, get the product out the door. But you have the chief officers or the VPs of the different areas that oversee each of the individual people in those divisions, if that makes sense. So it's definitely a more complicated version of the hierarchy. Most people think of the functional hierarchy. They think less often of the divisional one. But once a company gets to a certain size, usually you have to move that route if you're going to separate the product lines.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's differentiation, right? Is that how you say that? In a lot of ways, right? Yeah, no, I completely agree. I know I work with a client that has, really historically for many, many, many years, over 100 years, been in the healthcare space, right? And not offering healthcare, but kind of creating the rooms when you go to the hospital and the clinics and that kind of stuff. And, for them, they've differentiated. And so they've gone not just creating the room itself and what that all looks like, but also how do we communicate and what does that technology look like? And so for them, taking the marketing example, yes, there's a chief marketing officer, but within that, there are marketing VPs for kind of their traditional product line. There's a VP in the technology side of the world. There's a VP in kind of even in innovation and marketing innovation. And so, it's as they've grown and evolved, they've recognized that, they can't have one person be the master of all, right? They need people to have certain expertise in these certain areas and really have that deep dive and deep understanding of that product or of that solution. And so it shifted from more of your traditional structure, traditional hierarchical structure into more of this divisional way. Not to say they don't all work together, because they do, and they talk about, how are we helping each other and how does this, achieve what we're trying to do from a larger enterprise mission and vision. And they are focused kind of in their areas as well. And so, I've definitely seen it, experienced it, witnessed it. It's it's complicated, but it's really powerful at the same
Yeah,
time.
it's honestly a very fascinating way to do business because you're recognizing the deeper psychology behind how certain product lines, certain services, depending on the company, if you have multiple, it attracts different people. And it attracts different people in different ways as well. So you really have to specialize sometimes in those services or in those products. I know with one company, I work with, it's the recognition products company. And, we can also do promotional products. So we're altering, the way in which we promote these. Yet it's not yet divisional. We're still a very functional hierarchy, but you have to take into the divisional side. Sorry, totally misspoke there, but you have to take into the divisional side of it into like how you're doing things. You have to apply it. And so when you're applying this divisional mindset, you can still do it in a functional and hierarchy, but overall, as you become larger, you might have to become divisional instead of functional. I mean, I know of some other companies locally that, an electrical company, for example, and they have divisions. Yes, they're a very much functional environment in which they have, this is management, this is like office staff, this is sales, this is quoting, but then this is like our electrician team. And then you have like, your journeyman, you have your apprentices, you have the very rare have master's electricians, because usually master's electricians will go and make their own company unless they're higher up in the company. But so once they get to that final functional level of, this is our journeyman and these are our apprentices, then you get the two divisions. You get the division that works with the phone companies, and then you get the division that works with the commercial types of companies you work with versus maybe the residential. So then you get to the divisional. So there's usually a combination between functional and divisional in the end.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree. I think it's pretty common in construction companies, very large construction companies, that it kind of ends up in this way, right? If they're building, let's say government buildings, or they're building residential or healthcare or whatever it may be. I've definitely seen and worked with several construction companies, and all of them kind of have folks that are responsible for different divisions. And again, the people that are responsible for those divisions know it like the back of their hand. I mean, they know what they're talking about. They know what they're looking at. And I think that the trickle down effect of that to kind of the rest of the company and the people within their division is really powerful, right? Because they know and trust the people who are helping to lead that division.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I feel like sometimes when I see a company going from that functional hierarchy to the divisional hierarchy, we see a lot of matrices occurring. And a matrix is its own type of org structure. So there's a matrix because there's not necessarily enough people or enough products being sold of that type to separate fully divisionally, but there has to be, and so to support the growth, you do a matrix structure. So Elizabeth, tell me a little bit about some of the matrix structures you've had experience with or that you've observed.
Yeah. No, definitely seen a few. I think that the benefits from it, I'll start there, kind of what I've seen with the matrix structure is it's very flexible and adaptable. And I think there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of opportunities for collaboration, which I really appreciate. So, I think kind of in essence, I'll maybe use that as a little bit of an example, even though, let's say we take a marketing specialist, for instance, right? Somebody who's working in the marketing team, they may have reporting obligations, both to the marketing leader, but also to the product teams, right? Because the product teams need marketing in order for them to get out there and sell their product, right? And to create that content and those resources. And so I think this is really, I had said before, kind of the dotted line, there are kind of the solid lines. This is my boss, or this is my supervisor, or whatever it is. But then there are these dotted lines where it's, but yes, I also have to report to maybe this other division, or I have to report to this other leader. And I think that, that it's worked really well in situations where there is clear communication. I think where it breaks down, from my experience, is when there's the communication isn't there. Maybe the product, using the same example, the product team isn't talking with the marketing team, but they're expecting the marketing specialist to do what they need them to do.
Yeah.
That's when it starts to break down, at least from my experience. And what I know about it.
Yeah, the breakdown of communication can certainly happen if you don't, have that clear communication of this is the org structure, this is how you are connected to both of these departments. Just like we talked about, it really determines and creates clarity among the activities that occur within the company. So that marketing personnel is responsible for the marketing team and the product development team, perhaps, or just the products team in general. And that's why I honestly, I feel like I see matrix most often when it comes to marketing, because to an extent, to some companies, it seems like an afterthought, funny enough, especially small companies. You don't necessarily have the bandwidth to support marketing or to finance it. And just because you're putting that money in all these other areas. So it's very important to have a budgetary breakdown of org structures to an extent. And it's not something we're going to get into today, but I know a lot of times I see marketing matrices when you have, a sales and an art team. So you work with the sales and art team together. The art team works with the products team, but then the sales team is obviously doing sales. You need to understand sales to understand marketing. You need to understand art and the products to understand marketing. And so we most often see matrices there. Obviously, matrices exist more than just when it comes to marketing, but that is one area I oftentimes see it.
I would agree. I think that, when I think about kind of the functional nature of organizations and and I know I'm just using traditional departments, if you will, or traditional functional areas. I know that there's a lot of variation, but just kind of keeping it semi-simple. When I think about the support functions within an organization, things like marketing, HR, finance, often those are the groups that I see having more of the matrix structure, right?
Yeah.
Because HR for a lot of companies, and not all, because again, we can go back to divisional. There are some companies that have divisional HR groups, right? Where HR is specifically focused on one area, and those are the only people that they work with. However, when you have kind of, I would say, more mid-sized organizations, that tends to happen. HR supports all functions, right? And so there are a lot of
I experienced that. That's what I am for the company. I'm supporting everything. So because of that, I adopt that matrix side. Definitely. I mean, I'm working on, safety and OSHA compliance, but I'm also working on, to an extent, applying psychology and HR to marketing. And then I fall into, filling in for managers if they're out because they need a manager overseeing the department. Yes, we have that separation, but supporting that initiative, supporting, the hiring initiatives, supporting just general filing initiatives that have to occur. And then just the overall organizational development as well. So I definitely experienced that. I have people that sometimes will work under me there, but being a chief people officer, that's where I see myself I am that matrix. And one thing I like to bring up is a matrix structure may also exist because services like marketing, finance, HR, a lot of times for smaller companies, they're also outsourced. So you might have one internal person, but they might not be as specialized in it as they need to be. And so you see a matrix in which there's partner organizations you're working with. And that partner organization it lengthens the size of the company, but it exists as a matrix because they're not part of the company. The company's paying them for the services, but they're not paying the actual individual they work with, but they usually have some sort of like account manager or advisor they work with consistently. And so you tend to mention those in the org structure through the matrix type of mindset.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I would totally agree. I think, one of the most, I'm going to bring up a different one if that's okay. One of the most interesting structures that I've ever worked in and worked with is more of a geographical structure. And I will tell you, it went that direction and then became more centralized again afterwards. But generally speaking, I think a lot of international companies do have more of this geographical structure, right? And for a lot of different reasons, maybe they need to be very close to their customers. And so it makes sense to have leadership and folks working in all of these different regions. but also, it may be kind of a language. Language is a part of that. If they're working in Canada, they need to speak French, or they're working, in Germany and need to speak German, right? It makes sense to have kind of more of a geographical division. And so while there may be one marketing team, let's say, it's then maybe broken down into these different geographical regions. And that has been, from my perspective, probably the most interesting and also complicated at times structure that I've ever worked in. I loved it. It was great. But ultimately, after COVID, the decision was to kind of re-centralize because of many different factors. And I think that was fine. I will be curious to see how these geographical structures do continue to evolve, though, given that there's more comfort with technology and with virtual work, if we will see the geographical structures change and maybe choose kind of a different way of working. I think it'll be interesting to see. I don't know. I guess I could make a prediction. I think it'll decrease a little. I think more folks may centralize, but we'll have to see. Time will tell.
Yeah, and kind of just to add on top of that, the geographical, to an extent, it sounds kind of divisional, but it's divisional based off of geographic regions, right? But I feel as the world goes to this more, diversity focused type of environment, people have an understanding of other cultures, and I think that allows that geographical type of structure. Maybe it's divisional, maybe it's not, but a lot of them I do see are divisional. It helps that geographical structure go more centralized because you have a better understanding of the other cultures. I mean, I'm a huge snowmobiler. I will admit I love snowmobiling, and so I ride a Skidoo. So any of those Polaris Arctic Cat riders, sorry, I don't ride yours, but Skidoos. And Skidoo, I actually get emails from them in French. But I also get emails from them in English, but it depends on, how I connected with this specific Skidoo company or this specific one. And so I get most of them in French because I've ridden in Canada before, in Quebec. And it's funny to see because there's definitely this like marketing environment where there's still a French and an English, it goes back and forth. But in the end, so it's geographical right now, but will it go centralized? So that'll be interesting to see.
We'll have to come back to it at some point because I'm curious on how a lot of these companies will navigate all of this as we kind of find our new norm. And, I know we're in the midst of that, but I think everything changes all the time. So who knows?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, that's why you need a plan. I mean, I'm planning org structures from 2-3 years out. Sometimes I'm planning 5 years out with different companies. Sometimes I'm only able to plan 1 year out. It depends on, how large is that company at that point in time, how advanced is that company, or where's that company going. So really org structures overall, it's really important to plan. In our next podcast with Terrence Dunn from Talent Acquisitions, he's coming on to help us talk about org structures. And we're really going to filter it towards leadership because leadership aptitude does depend on the different org structures. And this April, we actually will have 3 podcasts focused on that, which we're excited. And so we're actually going to pull you guys in and start to really develop an org structure using a case study as well. So that'll come a little bit later this month as well.
Yeah. I think it'll be fun. I think, there's a lot of different ways, and we've talked about a lot of them. And I think that it's important just to say that there's no one right way. There may be, to develop an org structure. And so if our listeners are working in a structure and you're trying to determine what that is, ask, try, ask your leader, or if you are the leader, ask, people who've been there longer or whatever it is. Talk to them and say, why was it decided to be this way? And what does the future look like? Try to, be curious about it because there's oftentimes a reason behind it. A lot of times related to maybe the strategic plan, the current roles or teams within a company, could be related to feedback that they've gotten from stakeholders or leadership or employees. And then lastly, my favorite word, of course, it's about alignment, right? So what structure is going to really best support any of the feedback that you've received and best support the strategic plan. So I'm going to encourage everyone and challenge you all to be curious, to ask those questions. And if you do know the answer, maybe ask how else, and just kind of see how it all comes together. I think that's how we continue to grow and evolve. And so that's my challenge to everyone today.
Yeah, and keep your eyes out this month for some visual versions of the structures we've talked about, because I know I'm very visual. It helps me. So really keep your eyes open on our socials for those. It'll help you, understand some of the conversation we've had today. And don't be afraid to do some research of your own. So, but for now, we'll see you guys soon, and looking forward to next time when we talk about leadership within org structures.
See you next time. This concludes another intriguing episode of Organizational Sherlocks. I'm Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, reminding you that the journey to success is an ongoing investigation.
Stay curious, stay strategic, and keep utilizing insights to decode your business mysteries.
Join us every other Tuesday for your next Whodunit. This is Organizational Sherlocks, closing today's case.